out of the Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right, welcome for this week's Breaking History on Badlands Media, where I'm happy to be joined by my co-host, Ghost of Base, Patrick Henry Gordon. Nice to be here with you today as we're gonna shed some light, I should say, on some shadows, some dark spots throughout history. So thank you for being here once again.
Yeah, Matt, great to see you. How you been?
I'm okay. I know we have a lot to go through. We 2 weeks ago, you opened up a lot of doors. We didn't fully walk through all these doors, but we opened up a lot of doors that a lot of people have not quite appreciated, have been littering the corridors of history, whereby little demonic forces have been running through behind our backs and pulling some strings. We were specifically talking about a lot of the troubles in the Middle East, the Southwest Asia, as some might call it. The Middle East, obviously, reeks a little bit of certain British imperial historical undercurrents. You know, it's east of what? East of the British Empire. It's so the I prefer to call it Southwest Asia for obvious reasons. But we were discussing some of the roots of some of the arsonists, the manipulators behind the scenes. You were bringing up some really important topics. A lot of the stuff that I had not really thought about, the way you were framing it, dealing with some of the reasons why there is such a thing as Zionism, as a state of Israel, as the Muslim Brotherhood. All of these things having been useful at different times at creating instability and creating geopolitical reverberations that would disrupt any potential emergence of a modern world of cooperating civilizational nation states. So I know you brought up issues a little bit of the Palestinian Expedition Fund. I know we talked a little bit about some elements of Africa as well. But how would you like to begin this today as we pick up this thread?
Actually, let's start with a little bit of like breaking news. I think that'll just to kind of tie the title of the show to our discussion. So let me share my screen real quick. Anyone who's been following me on Twitter or X knows that I've been tweeting about this as of yesterday, or maybe it was Monday. No, it was yesterday. So Saudi Arabia yesterday was officially awarded the World Expo for 2030 in Riyadh. Now, this is something that I've actually been talking about this for a little while. Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, has actually been talking about this since at least 2015, when him and his father, who at the time his father was the king, he was the defense minister, he wasn't yet Crown Prince. They went to the White House to visit with Obama. As Ben Hubbard, who's a CIA apologist journalist for the New York Times, reports, Mohammed bin Salman explained to Obama his vision for Saudi Arabia, rail lines, infrastructure. Basically, he wanted to put Saudi Arabia on the map as being like a global, like the center of the world, basically. He wanted to make it a great world power. And Obama dismissed it all as a bunch of bluffing. He thought he was basically deflecting and trying to distract from more nefarious schemes. Now, fast forward, this is something that he's been talking about doing, having this big event in 2030. This is something that's been in the works for a while, and it's not necessarily been secret. But as of yesterday, they were officially awarded in Paris a bid to make it not just an event, but a World Expo event. So I guess that probably opens up additional resources for them. The point being is that Obama was wrong. MBS was serious about bringing this to fruition. And I think what we're seeing right now, between that and the progress that the Saudis made around the world. They went to Beijing, Moscow, London, and Paris to recruit kind of this global coalition to end the fighting in Israel and in Gaza, and kind of like a coalition for peace, basically, as opposed to World War III. I think what we're seeing, and what I said on Badlands Daily yesterday and Monday, is we're seeing like the return of statecraft and diplomacy to the world. Whereas before, diplomacy has really been, under the management of the United States and Western intelligence agencies, has really been conducted using blackmail, coercion, leverage. The IMF, the countries will get indebted to the IMF. Egypt, for example, Bibi Netanyahu told Egypt if they were to accept all the refugees from Gaza, the IMF would forgive all their loans, and they're one of the most indebted nations to the IMF. So those are the ways that Joe Biden's ambassador to Sudan threatened Sudan when they were considering a proposal from Russia to build a naval base on the coast in the Red Sea. They made a similar sort of threat where they threatened to use kind of economic sanctions and the IMF to coerce Sudan into rejecting the proposal. They accepted the proposal, and then a few weeks after that, they broke into civil war, and they're still in civil war. They've been in civil war since January. So, I mean, is the State Department behind it? Who knows? But I think that just demonstrates that we are seeing a return, I think, to actual statecraft based on mutual trust, mutual symbiosis. And it's worth noting. I think that's something that's really worth talking about. So I want to pivot from there to the ideas of these companies that we talked about before we get into the Palestine Exploration Fund. Let me show you real quick. I want to share my screen and show you that mirror map that I had created. This one. Yeah, this one. Okay, so there were many different companies that were created by the British, in the 1500s and 1600s and 1700s as they were exploring the world and kind of creating the British Empire. And the purpose of these companies were to colonize these places. The Virginia Company was created, I think, in the early 1600s. I think it was 1606, 1605. That was to colonize Virginia. Same with the Muscovy Company, many different companies, and all of them were responsible for colonizing and creating trade and commerce, and not necessarily nefarious intentions from the forefront, but you can see how a corporation with ulterior motives could easily be corrupted for profit or personal benefit by its agents. So if we look at, I want to show here, if you can see my screen, these are two different graphics I want to show. This on the right are the early governors of the East India Company. So the East India Company was created in 1600, around the time that the Virginia Company was created. And the two governors, we talked about 2 weeks ago how really this idea of proxy wars started in 1735 when England and France were at war with each other, and that bled into India. In the 1600s, you had less of this combative militant action and more of just actual pure commerce, where they're just trying to get their trade established and establish relationships and identify where the resources are. And they're working with local warlords, local princes, what have you. The first two governors that were in charge of this company, the first is Thomas Smythe and the second is Sir John Watts. Both of them were involved with the Virginia Company. Thomas Smythe was the treasurer of the Virginia Company until, I think, 1620, when he was involved in some scandal around the Virginia Company, corruption that led to him being expelled. But point being is that so the same guys who were colonizing America were also colonizing India. You have a lot of this bleed over. These flags right here, these are the flags of the East India Company. So look at the flag in the East India Company in 1600 versus 1707. And now the reason that this is changing is because this is the flag of England right here, this white field with the red cross. The blue flag is the flag of Scotland. And then this last one, I think, is these red lines. I think it's for Wales, if I'm not mistaken. So that's where the British flag comes from. The British flag, I'll show you right here, comes from. I don't have it. 1 second. Let me grab it from over here. The British flag has been compounded and is actually. So here's the British flag. The British flag is the English flag, the Scottish flag, and then I think in 1801 they added Ireland. I'm sorry, it's Ireland. So these three flags together gives you the British flag. And so you can see how the East India Company flag evolved to reflect that. Charles Fawcett, who is a historian from the turn of the 20th century, for the East India Company, he actually argues in the 20th century that the American flag was based on the East India Company flag. That the 13 stripes, blue field, that the East India Company flag. Yeah. Now, is there truth to that? That's for another discussion for another time. But you can see how as we discuss Israel and we discuss the Palestine Exploration Fund, keep in mind this was happening everywhere. these nefarious influences were also in America, and we probably in the future need to unpack some of that as it relates to America. You and Sean Morgan have been doing that a lot in the show, so I think that this is just a continuation of that. But I think it's important to keep this in mind as we move forward and discuss this and talk about the East India Company, or I'm sorry, the Palestine Exploration Fund. So the Palestine Exploration Fund, the origins of it are actually something called the Ordnance Survey of Jerusalem, which in 1864, and actually prior to that, you had wealthy British nobles who were sympathetic. They were evangelicals. They were Protestant Christians. They were sympathetic to this emerging concept of Zionism, which was the Holy Land. They wanted to understand Jerusalem. They wanted to explore Jerusalem. They were buying property there. They're setting up farms, setting up schools for agriculture to teach the locals how to farm. And ultimately, the idea really was to, and feel free to weigh in, but ultimately the idea was to establish a homeland for the Jewish diaspora, which was the scattering of the Jewish people around the world over the centuries. And they felt that this was like a Christian obligation, like it was like part of like the concept of like Christian charity and Christian belief that the righteousness of the Christians should do this on behalf of their ancestral brothers, the Jewish people. So in 1855, you have a guy by the name of, his name is James Finn. So Finn had a piece of land outside the walls of the old city in Jerusalem. Kareem Abraham is the name of this training farm that he set up for Jews who were moving there to set up agriculture schools and teach them how to be productive citizens. 9 years after that, 1864, they established a group of nobles in London established the Ordnance Survey of Jerusalem. They want to develop a map of Jerusalem, and so they can have something to refer to when they're back in England. So they commissioned this, and they sent Charles William Wilson, who was from the Royal Engineers. You'll remember that we established 2 weeks ago the Royal Engineers were foundational to establishing British intelligence in 1873, working with the East India Company. So they send the Royal Engineers, a team of Royal Engineers, to Jerusalem to map out the city. At the same time, 1865, it would have been a year later, the Palestine Exploration Fund is officially formed. It's a society in Britain. There are a lot of these societies, which I'm sure you're probably very well versed in this. Many of these societies were evolving and emerging in London and around like the elites who were trying to basically organize and orchestrate how they're going to manage this growing empire, the British Empire around the world. And so the Palestine Exploration Fund was basically the organization to manage the efforts and activities in Palestine. So they decide that they now needed to commission a larger survey of not just Jerusalem, but the whole Palestine region. And so in 1874, which remember that's an important year, is the same year that British intelligence, or around the same year that British intelligence was created, they send Lord Kitchener, who is a British officer, to Palestine to map out the entire region. And the map that he develops and brings back in 1874 is the same map. It's the same grid that the government of Israel still uses today to chart the entire country. So the grid lines that he drew in 1874 are the same grid lines that are used today by all the authorities in that region. Interestingly enough. So this is an important map that Kitchener develops. And so Kitchener himself is actually an important figure. We had alluded to him a little bit before. He dies on a ship in 1916 on his way to Russia to discuss war efforts with the Russian Tsar. There are, in between those two periods, from 1874 to 1916, he becomes a very, very important figure in the British government and the British military. He serves in Sudan. He serves in Khartoum. Khartoum was a very, very important place in Sudan where a huge battle was fought during the Boer War in the 1890s. And Charles Gordon, who was there before Kitchener, kind of led like a last stand where he stayed there with a group of men and fought to the death against the locals. And he kind of became a martyr and kind of became this heroic figure in British lore for his last stand. And so Gordon of Khartoum, it was this character that was used kind of to invoke the imagination of children and inspire people to go out and explore the world and join the British military and kind of view the British in a sympathetic light. A similar caricature was created for Thomas Lawrence of Arabia during World War One. Similar idea, like we're going to create this narrative, this story, kind of this action hero, and we're going to use this to sell the war effort to not just the British people but the Americans as well. The Americans ate that up, right. And so Kitchener was the one who really put Lawrence in Arabia and put him in a position to help the Hashemites fight the Ottomans in 1916. That was when that effort started. And then Kitchener, of course, dies. Don't know if you have anything you want to talk about with Kitchener as it relates before I go further, but just wanted to open that up for you.
No, I mean, only superficially. I think you've done much more pioneering research on this. I could say one thing, which is that the work that because Kitchener he did quite a bit in his time before he was eliminated for whatever reason, just like T. Lawrence was limited around the same time, and both of them were operating. There does seem to be a feud between different factions within the British High Command, between one group centered in the British India office and one group centered in the British Cairo office that had competing views. Neither one was good, right? But they didn't necessarily have a consensus on which direction, which battle plan would be applied for the broader Middle East. There were certain common things they all agreed upon, but obviously the grouping that put their money and efforts behind the Hashemites from Jordan that were supposed to become the top dogs under the new system of controls outside of that involved Kitchener, that involved T. Lawrence, but then T. Lawrence definitely went native. I mean, he made promises that he felt he couldn't break. It's like, I promised these people, I fought with them to overthrow the Ottomans. I can't turn my back on them now. He's a bit of a renegade in that sense. And Churchill. The Churchill group were totally for the House of al-Saud, and they were like, no, we're going to go with these guys, these Bedouin guys instead. We can use them better. And it's just interesting to see sometimes some of these inner backstabbing fights, and even the Milner group that circled around Cecil Rhodes and Churchill. Churchill worked in South Africa, right? The whole Milner kindergarten that ran the Rhodes Trust, the Rhodes Scholarship operation that took over control of so many governments throughout the 20th century. They were all working together with Churchill and they would often work with Kitchener, who was assigned to really break the will of the fighters, the Boers and the Zulus, who were working together by declaring war against their children and their wives, putting them in concentration camps. That's where the origins of concentration camps come from. But you always had these little disputes between the Milner, Cecil Rhodes, Churchill group versus Kitchener and his grouping that manifested in these weird things, like the death of Kitchener when he's doing some back channel operations with Russia, and the death of T. Lawrence, or even the death of Steed, W.T. Steed, who at a certain point was moving a little bit towards the Kitchener line of the British Cairo office, and instead found himself on the Titanic. Even though he was a propagandist for the Cecil Rhodes roundtable operation, he found himself on the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And yeah, so
before you shift gears, I'm looking at the time. Maybe it's time that we do a little commercial break. And what I'll do, I'm gonna try my hand at doing this. I'm usually not that great, but hopefully I'll show a little bit of competency. We're gonna go for a little break and listen to a word from a couple of Badlands sponsors, starting with Goldco. All right. So if you watch this show, you know how we feel about the government and our financial system. So it's no secret that we are believers in diversifying your money with precious metals like gold and silver. But when it comes to buying precious metals, you need the right company in your corner. That's why Badlands has partnered with the top-rated precious metals company Goldco, because reputation matters. Goldco has helped people like you and me place over $1 billion in gold and silver. For those with retirement accounts, they are offering Badlands supporters up to $10,000 in free silver when opening a qualified IRA account. This is your opportunity to protect yourself from our out-of-control, corrupt government. Visit badlandsgold.com today. That is badlandsgold.com today. The next little segment we have is from the Wellness Company. We live in dangerous and unstable times: pandemics, international security, insecurity, shortages, supply chain disruptions, and an economy on the brink. We know we can't simply trust the government to protect us. Now more than ever, everyone needs to be prepared. Being prepared is more than just stockpiling ammo, food, and supplies. Being prepared should also include stockpiling critical prescription medications. That's where the Wellness Company comes in. The Wellness Company's medical emergency kit contains prescription antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics that you need to keep you and your family safe. From anthrax to tick bites to COVID and even a bioweapon like the plague, the Wellness Company's medical emergency kit's exactly what you need to have on hand to be prepared. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/TWC today to order your own kit and save an additional 15% with promo code Badlands. That's badlandsmedia.tv/TWC promo code Badlands. All right, back to you, Gordon.
All right.
And I had Goldco on the whole time. Damn. Okay. Next time I'll not make that error. Okay. Go for it.
All right. Let's see. So yes, let's talk real quick. You mentioned something that I want to touch on, and then we'll kind of double back to a few people. So you mentioned like the warring between interested parties. We mentioned last week how it's an oversimplification, I think, to look at the cabal or the powers that be as one single group that's a monolithic group with one agenda. It's really a network or an array of groups that are all kind of competing with each other for power. Like in a giant Game of Thrones. I mean, that's really, I think, probably a more accurate way to look at it, because if you really think about it and you map onto the idea of like a megalomaniac sociopath, like that's the kind of person it requires to do some of the things that these organizations were doing. If multiple people are of that mindset, then they're not going to be satisfied with being, second or third. Like they're going to want to be first. They're going to want to be the top dog. So that's kind of the dynamic I think that is driving a lot of this, is that a lot of it's just the competition for power, for greed, what have you. And there's multiple organizations and people competing, as you just detailed. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And that kind of ties into what we discussed before about 2 weeks ago with the East India Company and how they would do these proxy wars where they would basically just they'd fund a prince or a warlord, and if it got to a point where he stopped being cooperative, they would just fund his rival, and then his rival would fund him. And so before long, they were basically funding every single little group in these regions. And what ended up happening is after 100 years of doing that in the 1850s, all these different groups, some of them were Muslim, some of them were Hindu. They had been fighting each other for so long, and they were initially so eager to get power that they were willing to work with the British and the French and the Dutch, that they realized that it was actually in their best interest to work together to drive these people off the continent. And they had the numbers to do that from day one. They just didn't have the will or the resources really until the 1850s. And basically the British had funded their own demise by feeding this enemy, by funding all these different little families and tribes and warlords. Eventually their widows and their sons and their children had all these endowments that had been left to them as payment for their father's loyalty or short-lived loyalty, that they were able to pool all their resources together and fight the rebellion in 1857 that led to the end of the British East India Company in India and the creation of the Raj, which is the official government of India, under the British control. So fast forward to the 1920s. So 1902, I explained before how Ibn Saud, this would be MBS's grandfather, creates the original Muslim Brotherhood. Basically, he takes a bunch of disaffected young men from Eastern Arabia who are Bedouin, who don't have a lot of economic prospects. There's a lot of British activity and European activity and trade happening around them where they're not being included. So they're not getting in on any of the prosperity that's happening, and they're basically just being left to pick for scraps in the desert. And so MBS, as a younger child, 10 years before, had been driven out of his ancestral homeland just outside of Riyadh. Him and his mother ran away. The Rashid, which is their enemy family, the enemy tribe, had thought they killed all the Saudis. They had taken control of the area. MBS wants revenge. He wants to reclaim his ancestral homeland. So he puts swords in all these kids' hands and creates the Muslim Brotherhood, leads them on a conquest of Eastern Arabia, destroys the House of Rashid, which is Rashid. I think it might actually be the right pronunciation.
Is he from the family that becomes the head of Transjordan, or is this a different family?
No, I think the Rashid, I think, are completely destroyed. I think they completely destroy them.
Okay. Right.
In the early 1900s, the family that rules Jordan is actually the Hashemites from Western
I thought they were
Arabia.
connected. Okay, all right.
Yeah. So for the next 20 some years, the Muslim Brotherhood helps the Ikhwan, as they're called, the Ikhwan meaning the brethren, are helping MBS's grandfather Ibn Saud conquer Arabia. 1925 is really the last time that they really serve a significant purpose, and that's when he goes to war against the Hashemites, who are the family that Lawrence of Arabia was helping 10 years before. They conquer the Hashemite kingdom. Let me show real quick. Let me pull up a map and I'll show what I definitely believe in geography to help teach. So let's see. Here we go. So this is the Hashemite kingdom. This is the actual Hashemite kingdom in green. In red is the Hijaz or Hijaz is the name of the region. So in red, that's the actual political region today in Saudi Arabia. They have like different regions in their country. The green is the Hashemite kingdom of Hijaz. So Medina and Mecca, these are the two major cities that are the important holy sites. He leads the Muslim Brotherhood in to defeat the Hashemites, drive them out of Mecca, wins the battle. There is a leader in the Muslim Brotherhood, in the Ikhwan, who wanted to rule Medina. He wanted to become the ruler of Medina, and Ibn Saud says, "No, come back to Riyadh. We're not gonna handle it that way. We want to make peace with these people. We want to make sure that these people are going to join our nation, basically." And so that leaves a sour taste in this guy's mouth. And 2 years later, 1927, this guy just starts leading raids all around the northern reaches of Arabia, Jordan, Kuwait, without the permission of Ibn Saud and against the British. So the British are telling Ibn Saud that they're going to help him unite the Eastern Kingdom and the Western kingdoms of Arabia. He says, "Okay, fine. The jihad is over. We're going to stop fighting, guys." And the Ikhwan are like, "No, we don't want to stop fighting. We want to keep fighting." And so 2 years of this happening, of them defying Ibn Saud, and he finally goes to war with them and destroys them. But before doing that, he sends a spy into the Brotherhood by the name of Muhammad Assad. And Muhammad Assad comes back and reports that the Ikhwan are actually being financed by the British. They're being given weapons and money to rebel against Ibn Saud, which is curious because, as you just explained, which is 100% correct, Winston Churchill and them had said, "These are our guys. These are our backers." And by the way, as Winston Churchill was saying that, you got Kitner and these other guys Percy Cox and these other guys saying that the Hashemites are their guys, and Lawrence of Arabia, we're going to back you. So you have all these different people who are doing their own competition. Now, Mohammed Assad comes back and reports to Ibn Saud that that he had hard evidence that not only were they getting money and weapons from the British, but the purpose of them rebelling and the purpose of them doing this was to weaken Ibn Saud so he could be overthrown. And once he was overthrown, they wanted to secure a land bridge or a land route, like a railroad, basically, from Haifa to Basra. So let me show you where that is. So we're looking right now. We're looking in this region, like I'm outlining it with my mouse, the central region. So like northern Saudi Arabia, that's what this map is. This is a map from 1952. It's an oil map. Ignore the oil pipelines. Here's Haifa. I assume I'm saying that right. Haifa. This is in modern day Israel. It's a coastal city. Here's Basra. It's in modern day Iraq down here. So the idea was they wanted to build a railroad from Haifa to Basra, which would have further connected the Indian Empire, the East India Company, the former East India Company empire, to the Mediterranean. And so that was the idea, and they felt that Ibn Saud was standing in their way and wasn't going to let them do that. So that's why purportedly that happened. So just a quick little aside there. But going back to Kitchener, so Kitchener dies in 1916. He remember, he is a foundational part of the Palestine Exploration Fund. He makes the map in 1874 that is still used today by the Israeli government. And this guy named Lord Alfred Douglas, who was an English poet and journalist, allegedly a lover of Oscar Wilde, a short-lived affair. His father actually finds out about this and accuses Oscar Wilde of doing this publicly, and Oscar Wilde sues him for libel and ends up losing that lawsuit, actually. But so this guy, Lord Alfred Douglas, he starts a newspaper called Plain English, where he accuses, it's a very anti-Semitic newspaper. This is in the 1920s. It's kind of espousing a lot of the rhetoric that Adolf Hitler would be stating years later, although he publicly denounced the Nazi Party and said he didn't agree with any of their ideas. He based a lot of his research and a lot of the stuff he was writing about on the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which I've heard you speak about before, like the fraudulent work that was put out to kind of create animosity and hatred towards Jewish people. He says there are many conspiracy theories. Let me just run through real quick the conspiracy theories that are publicly alleged before I get to him specifically about Kitchener's death. You have one guy by the name of Erich Ludendorff, who's the general from the German military. He says that, quote, talking about Kitchener, his mysterious death was the work neither of a German mine nor a German torpedo, but of the power which would not permit the Russian army to recover with the help of Lord Kitchener, because the destruction of the Tsarist Russia had been determined upon. Lord Kitchener's death was caused by his ability. Basically, what he's saying is that there was a conspiracy to overthrow Russia, which happened a year after Kitchener's death. And Kitchener would have been a big impediment to that because he was a very capable leader and may have thwarted the Bolshevik Revolution. This is a German general saying this. You have another guy by the name of Frank Power, says that Kitchener's body had been found by Norwegian fishermen, and that the authorities had intervened and recovered the body and lied about it. You have a Boer soldier by the name of Frederick Duskin. I don't think I'm pronouncing his name right, but he claimed that he had assassinated Kitchener in Cape Town, actually, prior to the sinking of the boat. So multiple ideas that are coming out, but the most famous of which is put forth the conspiracy, or another conspiracy, is that explosives were put on the ship by Irish Republicans who were basically like Irish terrorists who were against the British crown. But the most famous conspiracy theory is put forth by Lord Alfred Douglas in his newspaper, where he says that there's a connection between the Battle of Jutland, Winston Churchill, and a quote Jewish conspiracy. And what he says, he accuses Winston Churchill of accepting money from a group of Jewish power brokers, basically, in which Churchill gave a guy named Ernest Cassel. He said he took money from a guy named Ernest Cassel.
That's the primary banker of the Prince of Wales and what became the House of Windsor. Ernest Cassel is like the top banker of the royal family of Britain.
There you go. So he accuses Churchill of taking money from Ernest Cassel or Cassel and falsifying reports that led to the Germans winning the Battle of Jutland, and this would have been in World War One. Churchill publicly sues Kitchener for libel and wins, and actually that happened I think in 1921, and that's actually the last time that a libel suit is ever won in British the British law or whatever of that magnitude. So then years later, interestingly enough, years later, this same guy, Lord Alfred Douglas, writes in his autobiography in 1929 that he, quote, "I feel now that it is ridiculous to make accusations against the Jews, attributing them qualities and methods which are really much more typically English than Jewish." Which I found that quote very interesting because that kind of aligns with what I've heard you and Sean Morgan talk about a lot on this show.
Yeah, I mean the fact that I've really become very persuaded that the protocols of the elders of Zion, the more I looked at it, it does seem to be irrefutable that it was a forgery, but a very convenient thing that's been used again and again to absorb the necessarily. There will always be foreseeable hate when you're an empire destroying people's lives and manipulating them, using Freemasonic groups to coordinate your affairs, light fires, create disturbance, overthrow governments that you don't like. So the usefulness of the court, so-called the court Jew, which is a phenomenon within that grew within the medieval ages and continued to grow, is a very useful thing because the actual oligarchs, they play this Venetian game called the Tertius Gaudens, the third who wins. And that was something that was a Venetian virtue, that the further removed you could be as a cause of action from the action itself, the more powerful you are. So it wasn't power by brute force, but power by the mind's ability to put systems into motion where people who are increasingly fools are doing the bidding, though they don't even know it, increasingly as they're further removed from the person shaping the grand strategy. So the usefulness of having these financial terrorists, these court Jews that would be responsible for carrying out the dirty work of doing the financial warfare against your target audience, they were granted certain privileges, certain castles, certain hereditary orders that they were allowed to go into that would protect or guarantee a sort of lifestyle for their kids. But at the same time, they were ultimately disposable too. So because the people who, if occasionally people would organize together, realizing that they've been burned by an arsonist, they would try to stop the hand that lit them on fire, which is those. So the issue with the Okhrana, the role of Russian intelligence, people like Sergei Zubitov, who was the head of the Okhrana, working for the Holy Brotherhood, this the old set of Russian feudal families wanting to go back and restore the old good times before the serfs were liberated. That brotherhood, that interfaced very much with the French occult networks, the British Freemasonic occult networks, and the rise of the protocols were popularized by the London Times, by Winston Churchill, who wrote himself in 1912, 1913. He was writing about the big Jewish conspiracy that was unveiled with the protocols, and all of the various leaders, especially of Germany, where they had this pagan, Volkish purity ethos that was being cultivated and groomed by some of the worst elements of German and French and British occult networks. They want that pagan, Volk, pure spirit, right? It's the blood and soil cult that they also applied for Jabotinsky and some of the most virulent British selected operatives who were deployed down into Israel to start a new state. And this is what Einstein attacked, Jabotinsky and his his Irgun network on, which were always supported by the British, just like the British were supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, in opposition to the good, like normal human Jews that just wanted to have a life and work, you know, in a brotherly way with their Arab neighbors. There was a lot of those. Most Jews were like that. They were pro-labor people who just wanted their families to have a good life, live in harmony. And then you had these terrorists, these Irgun Jabotinskyite terrorists, cultivated, groomed, armed to do night raids, create the secret night squads that would go out and just kill Arab families as part of the assertion of this Nietzschean Übermenschen ethos into that zone. And this is what Einstein criticized in 49 this the Jabotinskyites, saying, look, you guys are like Hitler. You just got persecuted by Germany, and now you're doing the same thing. And Einstein got a lot of flack for that. But yeah, the British are always giving promises to people on all sides and then undermining those promises by inflaming the worst, most destructive elements in all corners, ultimately because they want to impose order out of chaos. So
yeah, I mean that's all. That is such a great point. And the reason that I kind of bring this long-winded and roundabout explanation and data is to kind of highlight that as we talk about this moving forward, as we talk about the Palestine Exploration Fund, as we talk about the creation of Israel, I think it's important to look at this isn't about the Jewish religion or even the Jewish people. This is really more about what the British did, what British citizens, I guess you would say, did, but people who you could also say had Germanic, Prussian bloodlines. And I know a lot of people who are listening to us right now are fans of Prussiagate. A lot of Badlanders have read Will Zoll's Prussiagate, which is a great series. And that, you know, the thesis of that series is really that the origins of the cabal that are now threatening the world really originate from Prussia. A lot of fascinating data points to support that. You and I think, discussed off air last week afterwards the black nobility of Venice, and how, you know, the bankers in Venice are really probably have a greater role in the all wars or banker wars narrative or idea than anything out of maybe Khazaria or exclusively Judea. So I think it's important as people like think about this, not to assign like the carte blanche, like the carpet blanket rather labeling of people, where it's like, oh, it must be this ethnicity, it must be these people. I think you look at it more as like, these are the bad actors from different groups who are all working to achieve their own prosperity, their own personal agenda prosperity. Maybe they're Prussian, maybe they're British, maybe they're Venetian, maybe they're whatever. I think we should get less focused on labels and more focused on the actual, like what's actually happened. What can we look at? And
what is the essence? What is the essential character of evil? What does it do, and how does it destroy the good? And then you'll find it takes on all sorts of colors and flavors and forms. It's not
every religion, every color.
Always, yeah. Let's do a quick little commercial break here, and we'll jump back in for a final segment. So we've got here no bugs, no beef. We'll start this thing out. Is it not going?
Let me see. No, it's there.
All right, Badlanders have seen no bugs, no beef on. Oh, what's that?
It's running. It's running.
Badlanders have seen no bugs, no beef on fire. Okay, have you ordered yet? Let's face the facts. America's supply chain is going to be increasingly disrupted in the coming months, which means it's not if we'll have a food shortage, it is when. Having enough protein to feed your family for several months is essential for your survival. That's why we've partnered with badlandsmedia.tv/nobugs. They provide sous vide, freeze-dried, all-American beef from ranches in Texas that have never, ever given their cows an mRNA jab. The beef, stored in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers for maximum shelf life, will stay shelf-stable for more than 10 years, without refrigeration and with maximum nutrition and flavor. All you need to do is soak it in water for 15 minutes and it's ready to eat. These are not typical survival meats. They're premium cuts of ribeye, New York strip, tenderloin, sirloin, and chuck. Get your family ready for the chaos at badlandsmedia.tv/nobugs. and use the promo code Badlands for an additional 10% off your order. That's badlandsmedia.tv/nobugs, promo code Badlands.
Awesome.
Then,
yeah, so we got a few minutes left. I wanted to
should I do the last one?
Oh yeah. Go ahead and do the last one.
All right. This is called Shop Bull. So, is your diet sad? The standard American diet is gravely lacking in essential nutrients, and unfortunately, buying organic, high-quality food can get expensive. That's why a powdered greens supplement can be easy, cost-effective way to get good nutrition into our bodies. Green Zone by Bull Nutrition offers loads of antioxidants and enzymes and probiotics in every scoop, and it won't break the bank. It tastes great and mixes easily just in water, and you can also mix it with juice, yogurt, and throw in your favorite smoothie. The Green Zone is non-GMO with no artificial flavors or sweeteners, and there's also a chocolate version that you can mix in milk and for a tasty treat for your kids. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/bull, BULLE, to find Green Zone. Don't spend $80 on green powders when you can get something just as good for half the price. Use Badlands promo code Badlands, and that'll get you 10% off your order and support America First Business. That's badlandsmedia.tv/bull, BULLE, promo code Badlands. All right.
Great work.
Thank you.
Real quick, I want to point out Trumpet, I hope I'm saying that right, in the chat made a comment that I just want to comment on real quick. They said, my dad was from Jerusalem and Jordan. Everyone was friends before 1948 too. That actually reflects back in early September, we had the Badlands GART convention in Florida. And on stage during the PSYOPs panel, we were talking about Israel came up, and I was talking about Israel and a little bit of the internal stuff going on there. This is before the conflict started. But there was a woman there who actually came up to me afterwards, who was from Israel and served in the IDF, and actually told me the same thing. She said that for the longest time, for generations, even today, people live there in peace. And it's like, Muslim, Jew, Christian, they all live side by side. They all get along. And really, it's like when there are problems that are reported in the media, that's basically like gangsters and thugs coming in and trying to like cause problems, basically. It's similar to like anything you would see in maybe an American city where you have, urban areas upset over or thrown into chaos because of, gangland type violence. So I think it's important to kind of remember that stuff. And I've also pointed out before, Gertrude Bell, who was the female Lawrence of Arabia, from 1900 to 1926, traveled around the Middle East by herself, mostly, being an archaeologist, led teams of men where she would tell them what to do, tell them to dig, tell them to do that, was never robbed, was never raped, was never taken prisoner or anything like that, never had any issues like that. Things that probably if a woman spent the past 26 years today traveling around the Middle East might run into some of those problems. Lots of other women who I could bring up who had similar sort of experiences where they never had issues like that. And the reason I bring that up is it's important to understand that, the Middle East was a Muslim majority region back then, but yet they didn't have these radical practices that we see today. And that's because they have since then been radicalized. And so the question is, who radicalized them?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's vital to always think about. Because, you got people like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, who Robert Dreyfus, who is a fantastic historian, did a book called Devil's Chessboard. And he documents how al-Afghani, the founder of Salafism, was working in the administrative staff of the British Cairo office. He was receiving support and pay in the 1870s. As he was developing his theories of how to interpret the Quran, and there's this whole theoretical set of structures that have been cooked up artificially by imperialists so that people who, when they build a relationship trying to understand how to interpret their Bible, their Torah, their Quran, they will interpret it from the standpoint of the most violence-oriented, regressive, ignorant fashion. That will then make them more conducive to being weapons of an empire that they don't even fully understand. And this became at the heart of the entire Muslim Brotherhood edifice that was shaped later on. So good point.
One of his students, I believe, was Rashid Rida, rather. I think his name was Rashid Rida. And he went on to found a lot of the schools that you're talking about in Cairo in the 1880s. And then one of his students was Hassan al-Banna, who founded the novel Muslim Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood that we know today, in 1928 in Cairo, after attending these radicalized schools. And I just always have to point out that happened, from 1927 to 1929 is when Ibn Saud, MBS's grandfather, is fighting his own creation over in Saudi Arabia. In the middle of that, suddenly you have a recreation of the Muslim Brotherhood, of his idea, hundreds of miles away in Cairo, which is like exclusively under British control. So
yeah, I've got a
Muslim Brotherhood being destroyed and then being recreated.
Yeah, and then it's recreated once more in 51, just
Correct.
as Mossad is being brought online, but this time with a British Freemasonic operative who is openly tied to. I mean, this is not a secret. This is not a conspiracy theory. I mean, it's a conspiracy fact. This guy is a British Freemason who is then reconstructing the Muslim Brotherhood afresh after they've killed two Egyptian prime ministers, and organizes to then soon try to take control of Egypt over the dead body of Nasser, who doesn't take that crap and ultimately clamps down and bans them, though they've been remaining there as a deep state operation ever since. That's the source of Egypt's problems. It's the Muslim Brotherhood, which is itself an extension of the British. So yeah, and so when you hear Al-Sisi stressing, I mean, I feel really bad for this guy right now at this moment. He's getting a lot of pressure on a variety of levels to open the gates, and people are criticizing him, and I understand why. People's lives in Gaza are being destroyed. It's horrible. But then, and they're wondering, well, why isn't Al-Sisi just letting them in? Why isn't he opening the gates? And it's like, well, at the same time, he is aware that there is an element that will give the Zionists an excuse with paramilitary groups supported by the still existent Muslim Brotherhood that took power in 2011, 2012. They were ousted by Al-Sisi, but they're still there. That gave massive amounts of support to Hamas. They work with these Bedouin billionaires in Qatar. Not everybody who's part of Hamas understands this. Most people don't, I would say. But you do have these agents who are using these people to create provocative maneuvers to undermine any type of constructive dynamic that would bring about a durable peace, as we were seeing in the months leading up to the explosions on October 7th, which involved the Abraham Accords, involved massive peace and economic deals going off all over the Middle East. And Israel was increasingly being pulled into something constructive for once, based on mutual development with their Arab neighbors through economics and business practices and other things. Now, Al-Sisi knows that if all of a sudden bombs start getting sent off from Egypt with these Muslim Brotherhood connected paramilitary groups that would then be receiving a lot of reinforcements from the 2 million people coming in. Among those people, there are people who have been very radicalized, having seen their families destroyed. They have nothing to live for but revenge. These are people who would now be part of these groupings that would then lob bombs off, and Israel could easily say, hey, we're under attack from Egypt now, just like it was in 1967. Now we have to do a full-scale invasion, which falls directly into the trappings of the greater Israelite groupings that want to take control of what they believe to be the chosen land, which involves the Suez Canal all the way there. That's what they believe the divine right of the chosen people is, to take control of that. A big chunk of northern Saudi Arabia, Syria, forget it. Iraq, forget it. Jordan, no. Big chunk of Turkey too. So that's the thing. Al-Sisi's he's struggling there. But this whole thing, it's British directed completely. It's not an organically manifesting expression of Islam. That's not what we're looking at all. Just like the worst elements of the Zionists is not an organic manifestation of Judaism. These are political perversions. They are not religious. Correct.
Well, and to kind of bring everything back to what we were just talking about happening in Cairo in the 1880s and 1920s. Here, I pulled this from the actual UN website. So the United Nations Relief and Works Agency is an agency of the UN that funds the public schools basically in Palestine, in Gaza. Here are the 10 organizations, the 10 entities that fund these schools. It's 9 countries plus the EU. It's the United States, Germany, Britain, Switzerland, Norway, France, Sweden, Japan, Canada, and the EU. And so those are the 10 countries that fund the schools that right now you have like the MSM, certain elements in the MSM and people in the American government accusing these schools of radicalizing the Palestinians against Israel. And what you'll notice is that none of these entities are Muslim majority countries. So you have non-Muslim countries funding the schools that are radicalizing the children against Israel. And it's
That's amazing.
how much more obvious could we get?
My God. Yeah, that's a really important paradox that people need to hold. That paradox, what you just said, is high value. And really chew on that, because we're being played. And when you focus on these paradoxes, these anomalies that break the structures of popular narratives, you can really make discoveries. You can start figuring things out and avoiding falling into traps that are set for us to sound like ignorant Americans, which is how the oligarchy kind of just laughs at Americans who fall for this every single time. We're so charmed by these sophistical arguments. And you have, like Winston Churchill's grandson is he was touring the Tea Party groups for years. It still goes down to the United States, telling Americans and rallying them against tyranny and how we have to fight Nazism just like my grandfather did. So too must we again uprise against the tyrants. And he's got all of these, American, Texan, Confederate leaning good people otherwise, but they've got all sorts of problems in their understanding of history and their lack of understanding about the world. And they think, and they're organizing their militias. The British who run Churchill's grandson are laughing. They're laughing because they want a civil war. They want us to fall into these things, Absolutely. So and I remember walking down in New York, there was we were doing a little concert I was organizing with the Schiller Institute years ago. And all of a sudden Black Lives Matter activists come out, and we're in Harlem, and they're like organizing a march. Now this is going to be for, we're just walking down the street, and we're walking alongside them. And all of the people living in Harlem are yelling at these people saying, all lives matter, all lives matter. There's no love for the Black Lives Matter activists. They could all see that these are provocateurs being set up to try to inflame hostility and aggression between blacks and whites in America. And so they just know it instinctively. They don't understand how George Soros is an operative for a global British grand strategy. They don't understand all of these nuances, but they know that this is not right. So it's not easy to get people who live together to see each other as subhumans so that they can inflame murder forever, which is, again, what they've been trying to do. They've been doing it kind of successfully in the case of Israel and the Arab world, especially with some of these more radical Zionists. But when you know it, you see how you can avoid falling into the trap. So with that, I mean,
for sure.
Yeah, we're rounding up the end of the hour, but this, I think, was a wonderful, wonderful exposition. Oh, go for it. Yeah, finish your.
Give me 2 minutes just to run through this real quick.
I don't think we have a hard. I don't know if we have a hard stop. I'm not sure. Nobody ever told me.
I don't think we do, and I don't think there's anybody on after us. So we'll go a few minutes over.
All right, that's fine.
Don't tell John.
All right.
Okay, so two quick articles I just want to run through real quick.
Good thing no one's recording this.
Yeah, right. So this is an article from 2013 from the American Society of Church History, and they're talking about what we just discussed, which is in the early 1800s, you have this evangelical revival in Britain that is triggering a wave of interest in reviving like the Jewish state and in Zionism. And it was dubbed by its critics as, quote, English madness, because it was like this English obsession with like colonizing everything. And what they found is that actually at the time, the Jews could not be categorized into one specific group. There was actually a very eclectic and diverse Jewish communities around the world, including Chinese Jewish people, African Jewish people. There are blacks, there are whites, every single color, every single continent. And so that just reinforces the idea that it's not like there's one Jewish group. There are many, many different Jewish groups, and they're all different, and they have all their own independent kind of subcultures, so to speak. But the other thing I wanted to run through real quick was this 2008 article from the Bethlehem University Journal, where they talk about the American policy towards Palestine between 1850 and 1939, which is the same time period we were just discussing. And this is a really, really interesting excerpt right here. I'm just going to read it word for word. It says, "It is clear that there were disagreements among American politicians on policy formulation regarding Palestine. The executive branch was divided. Presidents were subtly pro-Zionist. The Congress was publicly pro-Zionist, while the state and defense departments, due to vast American interests in the region, were more understanding of the Arab and Palestinian interests. I'm just going to go on and read the rest of the paragraph. He says, certain American Jewish and Zionist figures were influential in harnessing American power to realize the Zionist goal of establishing a homeland for the Jews in Palestine. There was a tripartite imperialist alliance between the U.S., Zionism, and the British Mandate, enforcing their will through mutual agreements and abuse of international law with regard to Palestine. And then it goes on to explain how basically, like under the guise of humanitarian intervention, they were able to come in and literally just physically take people and throw them out of their houses. And if they resisted, they just shot them. And that's what led to like the 1948 war between the Arabs and Israel, which were basically the British. And it's what fascinated me the most about this article is, number one, it explains that U.S. support for the creation of Israel was absolutely like paramount, meaning the CIA. The CIA was created the year before Israel was established, but also that there was a breaking within the Defense Department, that actually the people in the military leaders were actually pro-Arab because they understood, like they had been working in the area, they understood the sympathies of and the concerns of the locals, and that they really did recognize that this was a British colonization effort and not a organic movement by the Jews who already lived there. So I think it's important to understand that this really was like literally a what's the word that the woke mob likes to use? They like to use, it's not cultural appropriation, but it's like whitewashing or something. It's like they were trying to like wash out the dirty natives and bring in and usher in an Eastern European government. And if you go and you look at, who Bibi Netanyahu and all the people who are in charge of the Israeli government right now, they're all from Eastern Europe. They're all Polish, Ukrainian, Czech. Yeah. I mean, they're Prussian. Like they're not, like their ancestry is not local. So, if you want to make those arguments, that's where it comes from. So, anyway, just something I wanted to kind of end on, that I found it fascinating that the American military was actually anti-Zionist at the time.
No, it's a really useful way to round this out, and it's true. Like, I read the quote by JFK on showcasing such an awareness and understanding of the plight of the Arabs through the Nakba and other things. Really, really sane. It's such a sane expression. And it's like, was that guy an outlier? No. When he was a young congressman saying this, he was representative of a major way of thinking within the American intellectual establishment, especially that had a lot of influence still in those days in the defense and intelligence sector, in opposition to the Allen Dulles, Mortimer Bloomfield crowd of traitors. So you have all of this, and I would just ask one thing: have you looked into the Plymouth Brethren, the exclusive Brethren, or the role of Darby and the Darbyites in America in creating Zionism, or at least inflaming Zionism?
I've heard of Darbyism. I've not looked into that specifically, though. I will. I'm writing this down
because there's two things. Yeah, I think next week. Have you looked into the whole Third Temple cult movement?
I've heard of that. That's like the idea that they need to destroy the current temple so they can rebuild it. Is that and that's going to bring about the end of days? Is that the thinking?
Yeah, I mean it's tied to Julian the Apostate, who was the anti-Christian Roman leader, the last pagan leader in the 360s, who was trying to set the Jews and the Christians at war with each other and revive the mystery religions of the cult of Mithras and Cybele and these other cults that otherwise should have been wiped out. They never were. But he made a promise to restore Solomon's temple after it had been already destroyed 200 years earlier. It didn't come through, but his operation, he was an initiate in the higher mysteries of the Mithraic cult, which was retooled a couple of times after the cults were banned in 395 by Theodosius II and Stilicho. And it basically became the Byzantine order in the 550s. And then that set up a subcult of exclusive Byzantines called the Cistercian order under Saint Bernard, he was the founder of the Templar order, and they're the knights of the order, the poor fellows of Solomon's temple. And that was the Jerusalem kingdom, which has the Templar order symbol, right? Of the big cross and the four little crosses. Now the Palestinian Expedition Fund, that's what the Prince of Wales, when he went there and inaugurated the Palestinian Expedition Fund in 1863 or 64, he got a tattoo of the Templar four crosses that also became the basis of the Quattuor Coronati Lodge, the Knights of the Lodge of the Four Crowns, which if you look at again, a lot of this history, it dovetails the Plymouth Brethren, the Exclusive Brethren, these different, they're clearly Hellfire Club mystics and occultists who are masquerading as Christians and interpreting the Bible in a way that gave rise to Christian Zionism, the Rapture movement. The Rapture interpretation work was created by Darby and his followers. The idea of like they were advising Herzl, they were working with Lord Shaftesbury, the third Earl. That was the first sort of Anglican Christian Zionist himself. They were always working together with these Masonic orders. And if you look today, you brought up these different schools that are funding different schools in the Middle East that are radicalizing kids. I would look into the Order of the Sepulchre, the Equestrian Order of the Sepulchre, set up the same year that the Templars were created and the First Crusade established the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And look at it today, how active and powerful it is in funding schools across the Middle East and different patriarchs, really? and how it's related to Pope Francis.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting set of variables that add, I think, a lot of color to what you brought up, especially on the school aspects and who's funding these things. It's extremely interesting. Disturbing.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome.
And I could pick up a little bit of these threads. I'll consider this a little bit of a teaser for people watching, but tune in next week and we'll pull on these threads a little bit more and see where it goes.
Absolutely. And what you just said, just to wrap it up, that ties in a lot. Like a year ago is really what started me on this whole like Middle East. I've been tracking Mohammed bin Salman for years, but I really decided to dig into Islam, the history of Islam, the history of the region, and really start to understand it. And I was shocked to find, because I just had made a lot of assumptions in my life in studying history of other regions, I was shocked to find that really the history of Islam is really a struggle against what you just described, which is like occult mysticism and like the rise of mysticism and the resurgence of it over and over and over and over again, where people kept worshiping, idols like rocks, trees, that sort of thing. And that would always lead to the sacrificing of children and that sort of thing. And I'd always just assumed that they were constantly at war with Jews and Christians. And sometimes they were, because those groups were worshiping idols and worshiping, as they saw it, false prophets. But really, what they were against is they were against the occult mysticism and the sort of secret societies that you had talked about.
Yeah, the cults are key. That is, they'll just contaminate everything. They'll create little secret teaching orders within the Muslim world where you have the public, the exoteric teaching that you can read for the low-level people, low-level initiates, and the people who are not initiated. They can read the Quran, but then or they could read the Bible, or they could read the Torah, but then you have the exclusive teaching. You have the apostolic word-of-mouth spoken teachings that gives us secret interpretations for the inner elites who can really interpret what the Bible truly means, or really interpret what the Torah truly means in the Kabbalistic fashion, or and all of them tend to, when you examine a little bit of their practices, they get into really nasty sacrificial stuff, rites of initiation, dehumanizing processes. They're all kind of different variations of the same freaking thing. It's nasty stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we're scratching out some interesting truths here. So this is going to be fun to pick up the thread next week. But always a pleasure, Gordon. Really, always a pleasure talking to you. This is fun.
Matt. It is, Matt. Always enjoy our time together. Well, I will see you next week, and everyone have a good week.